6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my Son, the Beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of the Lord lives forever. And this is the word of the Lord. All thanks be to God.
Listen. I don't want to listen. Listen, it's important. Can't nobody tell me what to do. I don't know if that kind of conversation rings any bells for you, but as we hear God's command today from the heavens over Jesus transfiguring in his appearance alongside Elijah and Moses, I think of how a child might be in response to their mother or father's command to listen. A child might respond obediently to their parents, or a child might be a real knucklehead about the whole thing. Now, it's no mystery that the disciples weren't always so good about having their ears and eyes open to what Jesus was saying and doing. They weren't always so attentive or obedient. They often were too wrapped up in their own stuff. Some of the things Jesus said to them clearly went right in one ear and out the other. It wasn't uncommon at all for them to totally miss the point of what Jesus was saying and doing right in front of them. Even in today's passage, Peter is responding as though he could provide tents for Jesus and Elijah and Moses in their glorious presence, as if that made any sense at all. Being so fearful and awestruck by what they were seeing. Now, it's one thing to hear words and look at wonderful, beautiful things. It's another thing to really listen and to see what is so precious right there in front of us, and ultimately to be transformed by it. The transforming nature of that precious, glorious stuff they saw, that glorious moment they experienced, it's reflected in the hymn that we just sang, "Transform Us," soaking it all in to the point where we become people who, as the hymn says, live in this world as Jesus' body, as chosen daughters and chosen sons. Less like people hardly paying attention to what's being spoken, and more like people eagerly, attentively receiving instruction, seeking understanding, practicing and becoming what we're hearing, what we're learning. More like God's children, chosen, being transformed in what we are receiving from the Lord. Transformed. Now, surely I am not the only one to ever think of the Transformers when it comes to this word. Don't call me Shirley, but being a child of the 80s, that is exactly what comes to my mind. Optimus Prime. The 80s version of him anyway, as you see in the picture. He seems to be an optimally prime subject to consider today. One of the good guys, of course, defending the world from Decepticons the bad guys. When he's got to deal with those Decepticons, Optimus Prime goes through a transformation from being a semi-truck to become what he's actually meant to be. As one brilliant Bible scholar writes for this week, there's a big difference between the words transfigure and transform. Although we use these words pretty interchangeably when we talk about Jesus' transfiguration, to transfigure means to change in outward appearance, to change in how you're being seen by others, as Jesus' outward appearance was changed right in front of just a few of his closest disciples. Now, to transform means to experience a change internally, a change regarding who we are, a change in our character, a change in our purpose. Now, like Optimus Prime, transformation does involve transfiguration, that change in appearance, how he looks to the rest of the world. But that transfiguration is only a part of his transformation. Seeing Optimus Prime changing from a semi to this giant robot would likely just scare us if we didn't really get what was going on. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? His new appearance as this giant, intimidating Voltron, He-Man looking kind of thing could be like Godzilla trotting into town to destroy everything. Or his new appearance could mean that he's the hero we're all hoping for to stand against an overwhelming enemy trying to annihilate us. What does it mean that his appearance changed? And that's the question for the transfiguration. How does that change in appearance relate to full transformation? In Optimus Prime's case, it means that his character and his purpose is no longer to transport stuff from one place to another as a semi-truck. His character becomes a force of good in the world. His purpose becomes to save. When we make our proclamation of faith in Jesus, when we become Christian, we are simply to be transfigured, or are we to be transformed? Now, it's a woefully common thing for self-proclaimed believers in Jesus to present ourselves to the world as being righteous, holier than thou even, so that others will see how righteous and how holy we've become, for whatever ulterior motives. Meanwhile, not really having become anything different than we already were. When Jesus was transfigured, his true nature beneath his skin was showing. Divine, at one with the prophets Elijah and Moses who'd come before. God's Son who we're supposed to be listening to. Jesus didn't transfigure for his own sake. He didn't need to be transformed. He was already that force for good in the world who came to save. He wasn't overly concerned with how the world saw him. He transfigured only in front of the few who were closest to him. To see Jesus appear in glory. And as we see Jesus appear in glory, hopefully we can see that he was doing that for our transformation, so that we might be transformed into something new, something better, something greater, for something to happen in us that's less like Jesus' transfiguration and more like Optimus Prime's transformation. The First Testament passage today foreshadows Jesus' transfiguration. Maybe it can help us understand it better. Elijah riding a fiery chariot up into heaven right there in front of Elisha, his protege. Now, in that moment, not only did Elisha see something miraculous in his teacher, in his father of the faith, That was the moment when Elijah's power, authority, and spirit was passed down to Elisha. That was the moment when Elisha transformed into something much greater than he was before, asking for a double share of Elijah's spirit, as the firstborn son might have received from his father in those days. The point wasn't really the glorious vision of Elijah. The point was the glorious transformation of Elisha. Much the same, the point of Jesus' transfiguration was the transformation of his disciples. A wild vision to draw in his disciples. Disciples then and disciples now, us, to become something much greater. At the heart of this glorious vision, God's words thunder down from the heavens and say to us, "This is my son. Listen to him." Familiar to Jesus' baptism, but at Jesus' baptism, God was speaking a message like that directly to Jesus. This time, God is speaking directly to us. From atop the Mount of Transfiguration, the disciples were not to simply stay there and revel in that glorious moment, but they were to be moved by it, to become more attentive to the Lord than they ever had been before, as they were to head right back down that mountain and get to work. Jesus' work of healing and salvation in the world. Work that begins with listening to Jesus, not as those knuckle-headed kids we may or may not have been before, but as deeply attentive, obedient children of God. With Jesus and his disciples at the Mount of Transfiguration today, what is your response to what we are hearing and seeing? What is your response to what we're hearing thunder down upon us from the heavens, the words, "This is my son. Listen to him"? After all, listening is at the heart of this whole glorious experience. Listening to the word of the Lord, becoming the word of the Lord. Beyond proclaiming faith in Jesus, but becoming the love Jesus proclaims. I pray this special moment does a lot more for you than it did for the disciples at the time. As awestruck and fearful as they were, they didn't really change much. Not until after the resurrection. And I pray that as children of God, your ears and eyes will be opened to witness not only who Jesus really is, but who you are called to be. Embracing that double portion of spirit like Elisha, listening intently, becoming the word of God spoken to you. May we listen to God speaking from the heavens to us. May we listen to Jesus speaking to us right here on earth. And may we be transformed into that divine presence of love that brings healing and salvation.